Alright, today we're going to be going over bullies at the table. Now, generally when you're dealing with a bully, there are three types of bullies you will run across in a tabletop RPG experience. The first type of bully is one who somehow manipulates the rules to their advantage. The second is somebody who is a traditional bully, where they literally push people around and assert their whims and will at others' expense. And the third is when you have somebody who has some form of leverage. Now, I'm going to be going over these in a fair amount of detail, and hopefully this helps. Now, bear in mind, when you attempt to confront a bully in a tabletop RPG situation, it's very similar to confronting a bully in any other social situation. You have to measure what it is that's going to be accomplished from confronting them. And the best way to go about that is to ask yourself, how badly are they inconveniencing the situation? Is it an annoyance? Is it a mild inconvenience? Is it a severe inconvenience? So at the table, if it's an annoyance, then try talking it out with them. If it doesn't change, then worst case scenario, what is going to happen? Are they going to leave? Are they in a position where they're the DM and you're going to go without a DM for a while? At the end of the day, if the annoyance doesn't outweigh the fun you have at the table, it may not even be worth it to confront. That's just a little negative quirk about the individual, and that's that. If it's a mild inconvenience, such as this person doesn't pay for the food and they eat way more than everyone else, then that does warrant some confrontation. And that may not seem like bullying, but it comes to the point where if they constantly come up with an excuse that they are willing to get defensive or abrasive about, and at that point, the difference between whatever it is and bullying becomes very negligible. It could also come across something like, do they tend to demand certain annoying specifics, such as always at their house when it's inadequate table room? Or do they demand that it's just little quirks like that that are mild inconveniences, like in the case of demanding it be at their house, gas money, out, like if there are other people living with them that detract from the game experience, things like that. The worst case scenario is you're going to lose that player. And you may have to, if you're going to change that, if you're going to confront them, you have to be willing to accept that. Now, worst case scenario, let's say you have somebody who's making unwanted advances on a female player. That's a severe circumstance of bullying. Now, another circumstance of bullying is when you have a player who is so imposing and intimidating to the DM that the DM cannot run the game without accommodating them in a fashion that causes them to overshadow the entire game. And unfortunately that happens in a tabletop RPG setting. Now, that's nowhere near as severe as unwanted advances to a female player, but it causes a severe hindrance to the gaming experience. Now, the first example you have where someone is manipulating the rules to their advantage. You can have somebody either spreading some type of falsehood, whether they're omitting detail, whether they're over-exaggerating detail, whether they're outright, there's no truth to their statement whatsoever. And you have those. You have the person who has roles that are far above what their character's capable of, and they're quick to recalculate and not want to press any further when you ask about it. There's the person who refuses to tell you where they got their ability from because it was homebrewed and they didn't want to risk that you wouldn't approve of it. Then there's the people who literally pulled something out of their fourth point of contact and didn't want, and just when you confront them about it, they will get defensive and try to make it your fault. Now, in this instance, you have to be willing to confront them. And the peaceful way to do so is, as a DM, you have a right to any knowledge about the game. Reasonably speaking, it's bad to set a precedence, and I've said this before in a previous video, it's bad, in my opinion, to set a precedence that players are allowed to keep information from you. Because if you set that precedence, then somebody can have an audaciously high roll, and they feel entitled to not tell you how it got that high. Now, I'm not saying all players who withhold information are liars. There's a privacy aspect among many people, but unfortunately, when it comes into this instance, if somebody is manipulating truth to achieve their desired end with the rules, you have to be willing and able to confront them on it. Alternatively, you may have somebody who sincerely is that good at the rules. Now, I've been gaming since I was 8 years old. I am now 32. And if you get those 3.5 D&D books in my hands, I can create a character that scares certain players that are even older than I am. And I have done this through very careful study of the rules. Now, as a DM, it allows me to spot an authentic manipulation of the rule, basically power gaming or munchkinning as they are called, as opposed to a outright lie. But in the case of somebody being genuinely that good, you have to be willing to tell them that they can't be that good at the expense of the rest of the group. It doesn't matter how much they can genuinely build that character, they can't just outshine, outstrip, and overshadow the entire group, because then you have, worst case scenario, one player and the DM. Now, alternatively, the player may also use this as a means of overshadowing the DM, basically usurping them, and they may get a kick out of it, or that may just be their personality. In either instance, the DM needs to remember that rules are guidelines to them. They're subject to a number of things. I have been guilty on many occasions when dealing with a power gamer that thought he could go against the DM and not the monster. That monster ends up having more hit points than that player knows what to do with. That monster has a random bonus that he didn't take into account. That monster has abilities, and it becomes a bad experience, because even though the group knows exactly what I'm doing, even though the player knows exactly what I'm doing, I'm now having to assert myself in a DM in a very unfriendly and non-entertaining fashion just to maintain power of the group. And in that escalated scenario, you have to ask yourself, can this person be reasoned with, or do you need to remove them? And if this is the case where the DM is this individual, manipulating rules or lying about them just for their own ego, you need to reconsider whether or not you actually want to play under them. Because if they're incapable of reason, is this a game you want to play in? Now, the second one, where you have a traditional bully, these people are used to being assertive, and very few social strategies are beneath them. They are not above being outright aggressive to make their point across and get their way, and they are also not above doing a complete 180 and playing the victim when their aggression and their assertion is not enough, and making you feel like you're the one in the wrong for calling them out on it. And as a player, it's awkward because you stand alone as one person who doesn't run the game, and the only time you have leverage at that point is if it's your house, and you don't want to step on the DM's toes if it's your house and their game. But if you're the DM, it is 100% your jurisdiction to call that player out, to tell them that that's not an acceptable way to behave at the table. And if the players bring it to your attention, you listen, and you listen the first time. And if the circumstance perpetuates, you need to remove that player from your table. This is a very simple, there's not a lot of options available in this one. If you have a traditional bully, you need to be prepared to fight that battle as wills with them, and if they will not accept that they don't get to behave that way at your table, just outright remove them. There's not a lot that goes into this type of bully. The third type of bully is the one that has leverage, and two very classic examples of that is when you have someone who has some type of pull with the DM or with the host or hostess as their significant other, and it puts those people in authority in a very awkward standing of not wanting to confront them, and even being put in a position where they have to cater to them. And at that point, you may have to treat them like you would a traditional bully. If it's a severe issue, if it's a minor issue, then you may have to just let it go, because it may not be worth it if it's not taking too much away from the game time. Now, if you have another instance where the person is like an employee of the local comic shop, depending on whether you're gaming at the comic shop or how invested all the players are in the comic shop, that can be another socially awkward situation. But again, defer as if they were a traditional bully, because it all depends on how much they're willing to weigh in on that leverage. Now, alternatively, and say it's their house, another classic example, my house, my rules, and then you start clashing with the DM. The only way to remove those leverages is to do just that, remove them. The significant other doesn't play, that's a really hard one to do, but like finding another comic book shop or finding another house to play at easily removes that. And yeah, it's a very awkward situation, but if their leverage becomes that impacting, it's a way to give them an ultimatum to fix their act. And if they stop showing up, well, then their intentions became clear. Their ego was that important to them. Now, on the note of a couple of things I've touched. One, when you have like unwanted advances, and I did mention a woman, and I say that because it's less common in the gaming community for guys to be harassed than women. In fact, it's kind of a problem that women get harassed, but it can happen to men too. And whichever way it happens, that is something that needs to be addressed quickly and fiercely. You can't let that go on, because there's already enough of a stigma that women get sexualized in the gaming community, and even if men are the victims as well, it's sexual harassment is a no-go if you expect to have standards of dignity within the group. And so that's something that needs to be stomped out immediately. And in my group, that warrants an immediate dismissal of the player. I will have one talk with them, and if it continues, they're gone. If they are harsh enough in their initial attempt, then they don't even get that talk. And that goes for in-game as well, and I've already covered that in my first video. Now, if you have somebody who's using a various form of leverage, I am to the point in my DMing experience where I have zero tolerance for anybody acting with authority besides myself. And I will remind them very calmly, but very firmly. And if they push that, I am not above doing anything to remove their leverage that is within the realm of dignity. So, when it comes to bullying, a bully will only push as long as they believe they have the capacity to do so. Worst case scenario, you have to be prepared to either remove the bully if they're a player, or remove yourself if they are the DM. And I'm going to be honest, if you're a group that mostly is bothered by it, and the group overall makes the decision against the DM, then you have one less player and you have a new DM. That may sound like a harsh way of looking at it, but if the DM's that much of a problem DM, that's an easier fix than it looks like. Literally, you now have a former DM and a new DM. It's that simple. Now, this is a little bit harder when you're dealing with close friends, but a little recommendation that I would make is set your gaming atmosphere into a different one than that as the rest of your social life. Now, it takes a bit to establish that precedence, but like I have friends who leave the gaming group to go to other games even. My oldest player just did that not long ago, and I accepted it because that's not a slight to me as a friend. He needs something else. He wants to try something new. I'm not going to fault him for it. There are players that periodically are inactive because they have lives. And to devote weekends, like as I run 2 games a week, and to devote your entire weekend to such an activity, it takes away the most active part of your opportunity to socialize outside of game. And that's something people need to understand. So, setting the precedence, as I like to call it, friends versus gamers. You may have friends who game with you, but separating your game life from your friends, from your life as friends, will be to your advantage when the time comes where you need to go, dude, you're not a fun gamer to be around. And I'm saying this because we need to address this as such. That way there's an identification that you're not addressing them as a bad friend, but you're addressing them as a bad gamer. And that's a piece of advice that I would give you and I would suggest you try and put that into your gaming scenario. But bullies are not difficult or not easy for anyone to deal with. But the convenience you have, the advantage you have as gamers, is that if it is one bully, even if it is a minority of bullies at a table, you have the rest of the table. You're not alone. You just have to remember you're not alone. Worst case scenario, and it's the DM, literally look at it as your one former DM and looking for a new one. You're a group of people. You can handle a bully. We've been doing this all our lives, guys. Happy adventures.